I'm here to introduce Jen Groscup for her presidential address. I want to start out by noting that she's not related to Lee Groscup, and I'm going to leave it at that. An inside joke of 2 hours vintage. Jen is a 1993 graduate from Georgetown University, where she worked with the late Norm Finkel. She spent 3 years working with him after completing her bachelor's degree. And at the same time, and this is going to be a continuing theme, she was learning to bartend and clearly also learning how to win trivia contests at bars. In 1996, she started at the University of Nebraska in the JD PhD program, got her law degree in 2000, and in 2002 completed her PhD. She did that actually at John Jay College during the last year of her PhD stint, and rolled that right over into a assistant professor job at John Jay, where she was doing research on law and psychology topics such as expert evidence, and running tutorials for her colleagues on how to win trivia contests at bars at relatively elevated levels of blood alcohol. In 2008, she moved to Scripps College, where I suspect she continued to build her trivia skills, although I suspect they've also been somewhat diminished by two factors. One, the research that she's been doing of late, which does take time, particularly on Fourth Amendment search and seizure issues and on consent to search. And she has a longer-term distracting research project, a longitudinal case study researching child development, in which it's in its 9th year of collaboration with her daughter. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to her.
All right, well. Thank you. This was for you. You, spoiler alert, switched the slide. Thank you, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. And I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. I think it's off to an exciting start. And I'm just really grateful to be here and serve you guys as the president of the organization this year and be here with you today. So first I wanted to say thank you to Steve for that introduction and for being the best graduate advisor I could ever have asked for. A little story about Steve. When we were in grad school, Steve always made sure, I see other people from our program in the audience, always made sure we had the best equipment, right? Always the new computers, he would Frankenstein all the computers. So he'd walk around the halls with his fanny pack full of tools to dig around in there and make sure everybody had the optimal performance. And I think the only thing Steve enjoyed more than you walking into his office with a completed manuscript, ideally that involved little tears, was if you called him and emergency requested help with your computer, right? Where he'd probably get there even faster to help you out. And I say that because it's related to what I'm about to tell you, which is the more important thing is that Steve was a very gallant advisor. Even 20 years ago, before the whole Me Too movement started, he treated everyone in our program with respect and as equals, with the utmost respect, to the point where we weren't quite sure that he knew some of us were women, right? So we started, do you remember this? Because we told you this. Okay, so we started joking around that the only way he might know that we were women, because he treated us so equally, was if we walked into his office wearing computer chips as pasties, right? And not because of the computer chips, right? Because he'd get very excited about the computer chips. And so one time we fessed this up to him. It's years we all held this little secret. It was probably at the conference. Do you remember us telling you this? No. You're nope. Well, then you don't remember what you said, which was, it's not that I didn't notice, but I had a job to do, and so did you, right? So he created a harassment-free pathway for us to succeed in our jobs. And for that, we are all truly grateful. And if more advisors were like Steve, we wouldn't need Me Too or the climate survey that the Professional Development of Women Committee is currently working on. So thank you, Steve. I'll get back to him later. So the title of my talk is It's Personal, which of course is on the previous slide. And so I'm going to start off telling you some stories about people's interactions with the legal system. Research vignettes, if you will. Imagine a young professional living in the only affordable neighborhood they could find, one that has a high crime rate. Walking home from the bus one night after dark, they spot 3 young men standing ahead of them on the sidewalk about half a block ahead. Instead of assuming the men were up to no good and crossing the street, they kept walking, only to have the men block the sidewalk, pull out a gun, and demand their wallet. This is a well-researched area for us, right? Eyewitness reliability. Imagine all of the factors that were going on in that situation that implicate psychology and law. Imagine a person buying a house for the first time. So many forms. So many forms. Insurance, title, property tax, mortgage rates, inspections, contingencies. It's all the law. Property law, insurance law, tax law, and the looming fear of not being able to understand or pay for any of it, much like Judge Jones talked about this morning being in bankruptcy court. What do? You sign all the forms, right? You sign them, because how are you going to get the house? But why? How could we help people better understand the legal issues they're signing their lives away on? Ensure that they're doing so knowingly and competently. Imagine a person whose father is terminally ill. When he was diagnosed, he went to his attorney to make sure his affairs were in order, to make sure his will was ready. He also signed a living will, expressing a clear desire not to be put on life support or to be given a feeding tube so that his family would not be forced to make such a hard decision. What must that felt like to go into that process knowing that you were going to need that living will imminently? How would the knowledge that that was going to be true, how would that affect your decisions? And how do we encourage people to engage in that difficult process? When that father later became unable to swallow, but was still otherwise functioning, imagine the child who suddenly finds themselves with medical power of attorney and has to refuse a simple feeding tube, knowing they were probably going to watch their father starve to death. How does engaging with the loved one's last will and testament in this way and in many other ways affect that person and the legal decisions they may make in the future about their own last wishes? Imagine a person being bullied at work. The constant personal and professional attacks are making it difficult to do their job and are invading their mental health and personal interactions outside of work. How does the workplace bullying affect people? They constantly report this situation to their employer, but with no response. The only option is really to engage in a formal process that would be long, drawn out, public, and possibly involve more bullying. Not only do they have to deal with the psychological effects of this bullying on their work performance and personal life, but they have to deal with the organizational issues involved in their workplace. How does that organization and the workplace response to psychological trauma affect them as a professional and as a person? Only a couple more. Imagine signing up for healthcare, right? Everyone has to do that during open enrollment. Isn't that like the funnest time of the year, right? Open enrollment. An employee carefully reviews all of the healthcare options. Finally, they choose one that appears to be the best option for their family. But in order to actually sign up, they have to accept a separate arbitration agreement giving the right to sue away in a regular courtroom. Unless they accept this condition, they cannot get the health care they want. So they accept, as they have accepted similar arbitration clauses for every typical service in their lives, like cell phones, cable TV, right? All of the things that we do every day. Do they understand what this means? How might this understanding or lack of understanding affect their decision making? Finally, imagine a person married with a young child. Her marriage started out fine, but over time her husband became more and more critical, to the point of losing his temper and mocking her for the most mundane offenses. One morning she's up before everyone else, waiting for the coffee to brew, thinking about her grocery list, right? At the same time, she's mentally checking off things she will buy, hopefully to make her husband happy, and some of the things that she probably won't bring home from the grocery store to avoid his anger. She's also making a list, not on paper, of all the things that might offend the husband during the day that she's going to try to avoid. She's going to try to minimize those triggers in his environment, hoping today he might not get angry. And as I stood there making that mental list, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I'm hypervigilant. I'm like looking around for clues in my environment, for things that might happen, and I'm trying to minimize them. And I had a flash of this scene from Sleeping with the Enemy. Let's be honest, not that bad if you've seen the movie. It's terrible. Of rearranging the towels, just so, right? A great example of managing the environment. And of course, I relate everything in my life to the television, so there's that. Because that person was me. And all of those people were me. All of those stories were about me. And in every one of those moments, psychology and law was there. It was also there when I was later going through mediation and divorce, spoiler alert, child custody negotiations, and now navigating the world as a single working parent who's apparently doing a long-term case study on her daughter. Now, I'm not telling you all this to be like garnering sympathy. The point is, everyone has these stories. Your stories may be the same as my stories. They may be different. Sometimes I used what I know about psychology and law to help me through those situations, and sometimes I wish I knew more about the situation so that I could help myself. You may make the connection between your personal experiences and the research that we do, or the practice that you do, or you may never have thought about translating a personal challenge into a research idea or something you could use in practice. The point is that interaction with the law is a human experience, and we all share that experience in some way. We all share it, and so does everyone else, not in this field. All of the people that we think about every day when we're doing work in this field that we're trying to help. So when I was mugged at gunpoint, the first story I told was right after college. I was the worst eyewitness in the world, right? Because I had, right? The police come and describe the perpetrators. Well, they were about 5'6", but they might have been shorter because we overestimate height because they were scary. I thought that they might be kids, but I'm not sure. And they had a weapon. So, weapon focus, and on and on and on. And this poor police detective was like, and I keep disqualifying. I'm like disqualifying everything I say. Because I just took psych and law senior year, and I knew about eyewitness reliability, right? And the whole time it was so obvious that the police officer literally just did not care. Oh my God, like he's realizing I'm the worst eyewitness ever. And later on, I received the contents of the wallet in the mail. Like, not the actual wallet, which, by the way, was like a hunk of plastic that I got at whatever was Target at the time, minus the $12 that I had in there and the book of stamps. Right? Stamps are legal tender, by the way. I've never once carried a book of stamps in my wallet ever since, because I feel like it might be bad luck. And the envelope was addressed in what I can only describe as childish handwriting. That was like, went up the page like this, right? And so I called the police and I'm like, hey, I think that they, sent me my stuff, which was like super nice of them after they held me up at gunpoint. But and they never called me back. I left messages and they never called back, right? And so I was so disappointed in the legal system because I had just taken psych and law and I was all excited about the legal system. And this experience, right? It was like personal, in a personal way I was disappointed. And after that was actually the first time I ever went to therapy because it was pretty traumatic. And I can still feel, honestly, the tip of the gun barrel in my ear when I think about it. And the event itself, the reaction of the police, my need for help, and my recognition of psychology and law in all of it really pushed me over the edge into graduate school, right? I already decided this is what I wanted to do, but I really pursued that with renewed vigor. And actually at the time I wasn't working with Norm. I took like a little break and called him up and was like, hey, I want to get back into it. Let's do some research. And of course he obliged. Every time I teach about eyewitnesses, because right, we all teach psychology, I teach psychology and law every year, I'm tempted to tell this story, and I never have. Some of my students have been in the class before and can attest that I've never told the story in class, because it seemed too subjective, like not data-driven. We're all about the research. But why not interrogate our own stories and the stories of other people about the legal system? Why not use these as a way to better understand the things that we're trying to understand? Because the truth is, it's all human, right? Just like we were talking about earlier today in the plenary, what we need to remember is that no matter what the interaction is, as mundane as it can possibly be, or as traumatic, it's all human. There's human emotions, reactions, biases, motivations, decision-making, all the things that we research in every aspect of the law. Even the stuff we don't think about, like arbitration agreements that we're signing onto every day, right? That's our interactions with the law. And I think, again, today's plenary with Judges Merriam and Jones is a perfect example of finding humanity and human behavior in new parts of the legal system. I doubt many psych and law researchers are working on behavior in bankruptcy courts right now, but it's clear from what Judge Jones says that human behavior is all over the decision-making, follow-up, compliance, showing up in bankruptcy court. Judge Jones is one of the judges who's trying to study this and to better understand how to make the best outcomes for people in his courtroom. Judge Merriam, who happens to be right here in the second row, deals with a wide variety of cases in her courtroom, and she's very knowledgeable about the research we've done in the field, mostly because we talk about it all the time, and the impact that has on our cases. But even in our first conversation about judicial practice, she identified a ton of mundane court procedures that occur every day that have psychological implications. Like one thing we meant to talk about during the session was sort of the organization of the courts and how that impacts how people within the court system operate and make their decisions. And I was like, that's org psych. We don't have anybody here doing org psych, right? Do we? Anyone? Yeah, right? Like org psych in the courts, who would have thought? Perfect research idea. And like the initiative that she talked about this morning, changing the process to give Social Security disability claimants their money earlier, right? Just a simple procedure like that that's going to impact people's lives. And that's the sort of stuff we were talking about that is so clearly human that we can help with. So the next thing I want to talk about is how can we do that? Let's expand our universe. Kevin Douglas, in last year's presidential address, where he focused on the first 50 years of psychology and law, because that was our 50th year, remember our 50th anniversary, ended his talk with an encouragement for us to think big and think about what this field, what we want it to look like in the next 50 years, right, at our 100th anniversary. And we are so good at identifying the big issues that affect justice and doing research on them. Think about what we know from the Innocence Project. We hear about the Innocence Project all the time. On their current website, it says that they've exonerated 367 people who've been wrongfully convicted using DNA evidence, and they've also exonerated people, unfortunately, who have been wrongfully executed as well. What are the injustices in the system that allow that to happen? Well, 69% of the cases that they dealt with, according to the website again, were about eyewitness misidentification, which is not a surprise to any of us, right? We all know that. And wow, are we good at researching eyewitness identification and eyewitness reliability in general. As I highlighted in the opening session today, not only do we have one scientific review paper on eyewitness reliability recommendations, and guidelines, which has subsequently been used by the Department of Justice in countless jurisdictions in changing police and courtroom procedures across the country. But now we have the latest, yay, new scientific review paper that just came out in February. And I have no doubt that this one is going to be just as impactful as the first one was. This is a huge accomplishment for our division, that we have done enough of this research that we are able to make these recommendations and to get this out to the world and hopefully change how the legal system works. And I wanted to thank everybody who was involved in that. Again, we did that this morning, but it's really it's a huge accomplishment. Another major contributor to wrongful convictions, defined as by the Innocence Project, are false confessions and interrogations, right? Now, we're also real good at that, because our only other white paper, Police-Induced Confessions, Risk Factors and Recommendations, published in 2010, was on evidence-based recommendations to prevent false confessions. These recommendations have also been used in countless ways by courts and police. And as you can see from our program here, both of these areas of research they didn't just stop when these papers were, right? They are alive and well. And that's great, right? That's what we want. We want to keep moving forward in these areas. In fact, our scientific review paper, hi Mark, I see you back there. Thank you for all your hard work on the Scientific Review Paper Committee, because now they're developing the next one. This is, again, a huge enterprise. And that one is going to be on mental illness and violence. It's already been approved by the Executive Committee for Development. And we have another potential paper being developed on child victims and witnesses. We only write these papers when we have a significant amount of research on a topic and when we can agree on recommendations based on that research. So they are a statement, again, of great accomplishment for all of us as researchers, as practitioners, and for the division. Some of our greatest accomplishments can even be seen in, I told you, everything's about the TV and movies for me, right? In 2017, we had plenary sessions devoted to some of these big cases, like Making a Murderer, and we had Amanda Knox come and talk to us about her experience with interrogation. Both of those panels were moderated by Saul Casson. And we also have lots of shows that are on TV, like Lie to Me. There's the Serial podcast. How many people use that in their classes? And of course, the sexiest of sexy, criminal personality profiling. Right? This is a sexy field. That's why Netflix keeps picking up these shows. We've got Criminal Minds, which has been on the air for how long? I mean, it's got to be like 20. They're rivaling Law and Human Behavior. I mean, not Law and Human Behavior. Law and Order. That would be great if they named a show Law and Human Behavior. And of course, one of my favorite movies of all time, Silence of the Lambs. So when I say expand our universe, I don't mean that we should stop doing all of this important research. I mean we should be expanding our research into the mundane. Like the stuff that Netflix is not going to pick up for a show, like Signing Your Mortgage Forms, Season 1, available now on Hulu. The everyday legal decisions that people are making all the time. And the reason that I say our own stories are important are because we're the people that are impacted, again, by the legal system every day. It's not just the people we research, it's us too. And I think some of my best, maybe, I think they're the best, research ideas that I've ever come up with are kind of from personal experiences, right? Little personal stories. So not all of them are bad, like some of the examples I gave earlier. So I recently started researching obscenity law with my delightful lab who's sitting in front row, as they know. And how did I decide to start researching this? Well, as, again, Steve said, I have a daughter. This is when she was 3, right? So she's 9 now. We're well into the study. So when she was 3, as you can see, she was fairly obsessed with Tinkerbell. And the movie that was out at the moment was The Pirate Fairy, right? So what we would do is, and this is before Disney got on, like, we should make CDs of all the music from the show, that are in the show, because they have all these songs in there. So I would go hunt down stuff on iTunes. And the song that plays at the end of The Pirate Fairy is called Weightless by Natasha Bedingfield. So I go to iTunes. I'm so proud as a parent. I'm like, this is going to be great. I'm going to download the song. She's going to be all excited. We're going to listen to it. So I go download it. We're getting in the car to go to preschool. We always listen to music in the car. Okay, baby, I'm so excited. I got the music from The Pirate Fairy. Are you ready? Let's listen to it. So we start listening. And the chorus comes on. Oh, shit. Did you not see that, right? The word in red is bitch. Whoops. So all I hear from the back seat from my daughter is, oh my God, Mommy, she said bitch. She shouldn't have said bitch. Bitch is a bad word. She should have said a different word besides bitch. I think that witch would have been better, but bitch is a bad word, and she should just stop saying that. It's like bitch, bitch, bitch. Oh my God, what's happening in the back seat? All right. So, as we're driving to preschool, I'm like, oh, now we have to have the discussion about when it's okay to use profanity and when it's not, because we don't want her to be like her mother. My mother's favorite story to tell about me is on my first day of preschool. We go there, right? It's one of those things where they go, okay, little Jennifer, come on in. Mommy, you go over there and hide behind the coats. And, because you don't know, the kid could freak out, right? So my mother's over hiding behind a coat. Okay, little Jennifer, come on over here and hang your coat up. So, it's first day of school, I'm all proud. Take off my coat, and I put it on the hook, and it fell on the ground, and I went, fuck. My mother's over there going, how did she learn that word? Because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be the same thing. She's going to go to preschool, and it's going to be like, bitch, 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 bitch. All right, so I'm trying to avoid doing that to my child. And what I did when I got home was look up, okay, this seems like I downloaded the song and it didn't say explicit lyrics. So, right, it didn't have the little E right next to it where it's like, this is gonna have some bad words in it. I downloaded the one on the top that has no E. Spoiler alert, the lyrics are exactly the same. Exactly the same. So I'm like, I'm gonna email iTunes because I'm a good parent, right? And of course the bot that responded to me was not helpful at all. But of course it got me thinking that. I'm like, well, maybe I should think about doing something about this. I mean, I was pretty glad that we weren't listening to NWA in the car on the way there, which relates to a judicial notebook that I had written. I was like, oh, I wrote about this, about a case, Fox versus, FCC versus Fox Television, about profanity on TV. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I should do some research on that. Dan Lynn's my oldest academic older brother, right? Your first student, has done some research on profanity. But I go and I'll do a little internet research, and really not a lot since then. So it's like, this is a ripe area. We're going to do it. So we are. We're doing it. So you should join us. Join us. Where else to look for new ideas? Well, looking for new ideas is one of the reasons why one of my presidential initiatives is about judges, like we talked about this morning in the plenary. Leading the way in research for the decision makers, opening a gateway to research communication with judges. And the initiative is about, as I said this morning, us getting information from the judges, like we did today. Thank you again, Judge Marion and Judge Jones, who had to leave already, for giving us some insight into their daily practice. And I'd already talked to them about this, but my gears were turning today, like, whoo, there's lots of research ideas here, so many things that we could do work on, right? And the other part of it is communicating with them, right? Trying to get the information that we collect out to the judges so that they can actually use it in their practice, which was what some of the questions were related to at the end of the plenary session, right? How can we get involved with judges? How do we get our work out to judges in a way that will be helpful to them? And so this is really kind of the inspiration for that, is I wanted to open this gateway for us with judges. And we could do this really with any practitioners in the legal system, right? I mean, I've focused on judges because it's something that I was interested in, but that doesn't mean that we as a group or as individuals couldn't open other gateways. So to get started on this, we did the plan is for the initiative to conduct some research on judges, asking them, like we were talking about in the session, like talking to them, what do you need? What can we do? Where can we help you understand the human behavior in your courtrooms and in your entire practice? And so to get us started on this, we asked judges at the American Judges Association April and September meetings this year or last year. The American Judges Association has a membership of about 2,000 judges, and they're from all different types of courtrooms, tribal, administrative, federal, state. And we asked them 2 questions. 1, which areas of the law do you think would most benefit from psychological or empirical study? And 2, are there particular types of human behavior that you would like to understand better in order to improve your practice? Admittedly, this is a pretty simple survey, but we're just getting started, right? We just want to get a sense of what's out there. And so for question 1, here's what we found so far. About half of the judges mentioned things related to decision-making and mental health or mental disorders. So in the decision-making category, implicit bias was, as Judge Miriam mentioned this morning, is something that they know about and are aware of and are actively trying to combat, right? And so more information about that would be even better. And then we see juror and judicial bias against defendants and witnesses, and emotion and decision-making in the courtroom. Now, if you do any search on jury decision-making or judicial decision-making in psychology databases, you could see that we're doing pretty well in this area. We do a lot of research on bias and on emotion in decision-making. We're also doing pretty well in the mental health and mental and disorders area. The most common responses were related to trauma and addiction in the courtroom, related to why people, like we were talking about this morning, again, why do people do what they do? Why do they behave the way that they behave? And then how that might affect their even attending court, right? Even getting through the process were the things that they talked about. And in the procedures area, bail decision-making was the most common response. Now, I did a quick interweb search on bail decision-making, and there's not a whole lot of work out there that we've done so far in this area. I did just find an article written by Nick Skurich and Dan Kraus, just published last month in 3PL, that was on risk assessment in pretrial decision-making, including bail decisions. So I don't see either one of them here, but congratulations, that's great. But other than that, and a smattering of stuff in the aughts, that's what we're supposed to call the last decade, right? The aughts, there wasn't a whole lot. So this is an area that is ripe for research, and that's clearly on judges' minds. I think a lot of the other things in this list are also areas where we haven't done a whole lot of research, like the effect of indigent defendants in the courtroom. I like to see that search procedures were up there, right? Yay! So that was exciting for me. And then for the other, we saw a lot of recidivism. Again, we're doing a lot of work on recidivism, but they also mentioned things like social media and the effects of social media on the courtroom. So again, a smattering of things that we're really great at, and some things that really suggest new areas of work. On the second question, are there particular types of human behavior you'd like to understand better to improve your practice? We again see about half, slightly more this time, devoted to decision-making and mental health issues. We see some repeat offenders here, talking about recidivism, implicit bias, again, something that was mentioned most often. Addiction and trauma, again, being prominent. When we talk about in the violent crime and intimate partner violence section of the graph, it was sort of in part a subsection of trauma, right? Like how does trauma, intimate partner violence affect people in the courtroom? But there was also this little extra section that was about, just like the addiction failure to appear in court, there was also like getting victims to show up for court was mentioned by more than one judge. So it's not just how this affects them as people but how it affects them in the process. Does that make sense? Yeah, which I thought was interesting. Judicial effectiveness was another thing. Again, we see recidivism, lie detection, things that we, again, are doing a fairly good job researching so far. And I really liked the other category because they specifically mentioned wanting training in social science. And I thought, yes, yeah, that's right, raise the roof. Let's get in there. And in here we also had things like problem solving. And I really am interested in, this is again what we were talking about both in and outside of the plenary session, improving relationships among the players that are in the court system, that sort of organizational issues that we don't even think about impacting the effectiveness of the court. So overall, what this short survey tells us is that we're doing pretty well as researchers and practitioners, right? We are hitting a lot of the points that judges want us to hit, which is great. The fact that they say we still need work in these areas could mean we need more work, right? Which, again, I would encourage people to continue pursuing these areas of research. They're very important. But the other thing it might say is that we're not getting our work out to the judges in the right way. And I get it. You may not be rewarded for the kinds of dissemination techniques that are going to get to judges, that are going to get to the practitioners in the legal system that need it, right? We all have constraints on our jobs in what we're able to do, what we have time to do. So I understand that, because some of those publication types might not fit, right, in tenure reviews or performance reviews. But I would love to see us dedicate ourselves to getting our work out to the people who need it, being the leaders of this kind of information for judges. We should be the place that they come. They want to know something, they come to us, because we're the ones that are going to help them understand the behavior in their courtrooms the best. And over my remaining term, we're going to keep working on how we can better engage in this interaction with judges, not just as individual researchers, because yes, also that, but as a division, right? What are some ways maybe we can develop to open that pipeline in a more organized way so that we can get the important things that we do to the important things that they do? So if you have any ideas about that, please let me know, because we're really just kind of at the beginning stages of making that part of my initiative happen. Oh, I did that, doing well. I forgot to advance the slide. Here's what we're doing well. Here's where we can dig deeper in the survey. So let's get back to stories. As we were preparing the plenary session that we did earlier today, Judge Miriam and I were on the phone, and I'm like, hey, we need to talk about this. She's like, okay, well, I gotta tell you a story. I'm like, how was your day? Well, it was exhausting. I had this settlement hearing all day. We heard a lot about settlement hearings this morning, right? And on that day, she was in charge of leading the participants through a difficult process, and it was a tough settlement because what was going to happen was going to ruin, basically, the lives of 2 teenagers, right, in the process, right? This is going to destroy a family and probably destroy their lives, right? And she knew that. So what did she do? Well, She's like, well, of course I took him on the tour of the court. She's rambling, right? This is just like, I'm telling you a story about my day. Well, of course I took him on a tour of the courthouse. And I was trying to explain to them how the legal system is really important. And, they really should, it's respecting them, and, right? I want them to feel good about it. And she might have even given him ice cream or Starbucks at the end of the tour, right? Yeah, I think there was ice cream. And there was she's like, there were a ton of tears in my chamber. There was screaming and yelling all day. And what she tried to do was leave them with smiles on their faces, right? I mean, of course I took him on a tour of the court. Of course you did? No, nobody does, right? Does anybody do that? And that was her goal. And I listened to that story, much like I listened to some of their other stories today, and it made me want to cry too, right? Because that just empathy and my friend's innate and natural, I want to help these people, not hurt them, even though I have to hurt them, was really on display. And I say my friend because you may not have realized during the plenary session, although Sarah briefly mentioned it, that we went to college together. Who would have thought that look at these bags. Are they spectacular? I mean, matching spectacular bags. Who would have thought, based on these bags, that we would be here today talking about her judicial practice in the federal judiciary? But those are some pretty awesome bags. And the gears, while she's telling the story, my research gears are like, this is amazing. Is this like David Wexler's therapeutic jurisprudence? Is it like procedural justice? What if we randomly assign people to courthouse tours and ice cream? Like, how can we improve people's settlement conference experiences, right? Isn't there some way we could help with this trauma that judges are experiencing? She's like, I'm exhausted, right? We talked about that today, the mental health of the judges. So I encourage us to think small and personal and the everyday ways we interact with the legal system, and to keep expanding, keep going, right? Do the stuff that we're doing already, but keep going into new areas. It pushed the boundaries of what we know, because I think you could also consider your own stories in this process, right? What things do I encounter every day that I want to know more about that's going to make my life, self-interest is going to make my life better, right? And if you aren't interested in doing it yourself, which is fine, we all have our careers, then encourage other people to do it with you or on their own. My third point being, bring people along. I would like to be inspired. One of our best sources of inspiration is, of course, in our field, our advisors. As you may have read in the APLS newsletter last month, one of my greatest inspirations in the field, Norm Finkel, died in December. That's us at my very first poster ever in 1998 at Redondo Beach. You'll notice I'm still rocking the bangs a decade later. He was my undergraduate mentor, and the reason I got into the field and decided to pursue this as a career. He taught me to think big and broad about the field. He was a great example of someone who pushed the envelope in research. And one of the great things about him was his ability to inspire with his teaching and his ability to see in you what you didn't see in yourself, right? He was able to identify people to bring along who really needed some help. Sarah knows from going to college with me. Steve Sabat, who I stole a little bit of the obituary that I wrote about him in the newsletter from, was one of his best friends and colleagues. And apparently after I wrote that thing in the news, he decided to send it to all of Finkel's mentees and people that he had worked with over the, I don't know how many decades of service at Georgetown. I started to get all these emails. Like, oh, I went to Georgetown and, graduated in 1985, and I worked with him, and it was like this, I had no idea that he had done it, so I was like, why am I getting all these emails? I can't open my email anymore. This is getting to be too much. But it was a great example of how vast our influence can be on people, how much you can influence people by trying to bring them along. Now, Steve, on the other hand, who's thankfully still here. He can attest to this. When I found out that Norm died, I'm like, oh my God, I have to email Steve. I haven't heard from you in a while. Are you still alive? Right? He was like probably going, why the hell are you emailing me like this? I might have panicked a little bit. Steve taught me most of what I know about research and everything I know about being a researcher. He taught us to hustle and get it done. And although Steve is also a big thinker, as you all know, in the field, I would say he pushes the envelope more in design. Even I think that's the thing that I learned from you the most was the legal system, as we know, can be, everybody, even ourselves, can be very critical of the designs that we use in our research, right? And Steve pushes he had us doing fractional factorial. Anyone know what a fractional factorial design is? Yeah, Steve's, yes, advisees know. Well, I don't even know if we know, right? But trying to explain it to somebody else is like nearly impossible. But he had us doing them all, right? Just trying to examine issues in new and exciting ways. Because the more variety we can get in the ways we approach this, somebody's going to grab onto something we do, right? So it's going to speak to someone, maybe in a different way. So we should also think about pushing the envelope like Steve does and like he taught us to do. They both brought me along, and I'm talking to all you people out there too. All of the advisors, all the clinical supervisors, right? Bring your folks along because it's just huge. It's huge to be brought along. When I went with my parents, there's Steve. I had a picture of Steve too. I forgot to flash forward. That was us at APLS 2 years ago, maybe. When I went with my parents to their lawyers so we could make my dad's will, I actually thought of Edie Greene. I don't have a picture of us, but here's my dad and my mom. Edie, as you know, does a lot of research in the field, but does some work with older adults. And there was a time, I couldn't figure out when, I looked back to try to find out what year it was, but she did a presentation I was at about wills. And I was super excited about it, so I talked to her about it afterward, and she was like, let's do it. Let's do some research on it. I was like, I want to do the research. Do you want to do the research? Let's do the research. Right? And we left all excited, as you do, from the conference. And then, of course, we never did anything about it because we get busy. But, true story, I was literally in the lawyer's office like, damn, I wish we did that research because I am a little lost here. I am not sure what to do. Psychology and law it failed me that day. And I looked it up recently, and again, this is an area where no one has picked up that mantle. So the thing about that moment was, this is the place where that connection got made, at this conference, right? And Edie, who's a senior member of the field, was like, I want to bring you along. I want to work with you. So you can also make connections to do weird, wacky research here at the conference. Use this time wisely to bring other people along, but also to be brought along, right? Find those people. We're all like super friendly, right? As a division, are we not? Do we like to work with each other? We do. So take advantage of this time. Another way to bring people along is colleagues. Come on, you know I had a picture. This is our past president and I at law school graduation. I'm very grateful to have gone to graduate school with such a big and close, continually close cohort of people. I'm sure you all have your own stories. I see you in the audience. I see you people. And that's a huge benefit. And the other way you can bring each other along is even just your colleagues, right? Your friends. Eve and I have started doing as the Fourth Amendment research, which at the time seemed like weird, wacky research. It's like, you want to do weird, wacky research? Yeah, I want to do the weird, wacky research too, right? Like, let's do it. Let's bring ourselves along. And the best part about working with a friend is you don't have to worry about imposter syndrome when you're doing research with a good buddy, right? Which we're going to be talking about at the Professional Development of Women Committee session on Saturday, right? That's a huge problem. That might be the problem if the Edie Greene approaches you and you start talking about it. You're like, well, I'd love to do research with you, but I don't belong here. But with friends, you can build each other up, right? You can rise each other's boats, as Eve often does with mine. And our community is very vital and supportive. So get out there and make the connection. Don't make me do it. I can see Eve with the face. But guess what? As an organization, we're also pretty good at this, right? It's not just us as individuals. We do a great job mentoring each other. Over the years, we've had many mentoring sessions at the conference. Our committees do all this important work. Our ECP committee just released a recent survey about all of the things that maybe they're not getting in their graduate training programs, like leadership experience and networking and information about training that we don't get as part of our graduate programs. And that's why my other leadership initiative is leadership pipelines, right? Trying to bring people into the division even more. So on Wednesday, we had our first workshop for the leadership training program, and we have our participants working with our committee members, and I just wanted to let you know a little bit about what they were doing. I was going to bring a picture, right? But I did not remember to take it of all of us together. But all of our committees worked with the leadership training participants, and there's some really exciting stuff happening. We've got 3 committees working to continue Eve's outreach program. We've got committees working on providing a platform for us to communicate outside of the conference. We've got 3 committees working together on developing webinars for those trainings that you're missing out on in graduate school. And might be my favorite, the last one, which is developing a mentor match program for undergraduates at institutions without psych and law, right? If Norm Finkel hadn't been at Georgetown, I would not be standing here today. I wouldn't have even known that this existed except for Netflix. And of course, I wouldn't know that it was an actual field and not just a TV show. So this is super exciting, and this work's going to continue throughout the year, and almost all of it is devoted to bringing people along. So, in conclusion, the longer I'm in this field, the more I think our stories and passions are important. They can serve as inspiration and education about our legal system and about how psychology can help us better understand the humanity in all of it better. So use your stories, use the stories you hear from other people, and use them to dive deeper in the ways we can inform the legal system. Expand your universe or help someone else expand theirs. Dig deep into new areas and help others do the same. Think about more ways we can involve people who aren't traditionally involved in this division. Bring people along. It can be in your own world, in the larger world of the division, or in the world writ large. We all have the power to inspire other people, so just do it. Thank you.